Chapter 15 of The Ancient Allan by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 15. The Summons. Now at the gates of the city of the Grasshopper we were royally received. The priests came out to meet us, pushing a colossal image of their god before them on a kind of flat chariot, and I remember wondering what be the value of that huge golden locust if it were melted down. Also the council came, very ancient men all of them, since the Ethiopians for the most part lived more than 100 years. Perhaps that is why they were so glad to welcome Bez, since they were too old to care about retaining power in their own hands as they had done during his long absence. For save Bez there was no other man living of the true royal blood who could take the throne. Then there were thousands of women, broad-faced and smiling, whose black skins shone with scented oils, for they wore little except a girdle about their waists and many ornaments of gold. Thus their earrings were sometimes a palm in breadth, and many of them had great gold rings through their noses, such as in Egypt are put in those of bulls. My mother laughed at them, but Karima said that she thought them hideous and hateful. They were a strange people, these Ethiopians, like children, most of them, being merry and kind, and never thinking of one thing more than a minute. Thus, one would see them weep and laugh almost in the same breath. But among them was an upper class who had great learning and much ancient knowledge. These men made their laws, wherein there was always sense under what seemed to be folly, designed the temples, managed the mines of gold and other metals, and followed the arts. They were the real masters of the land. The rest were but slaves, content to live in plenty, for in that fertile soil want never came near them, and to do as they were bid. Thus they passed from the cradle to the grave amidst song and flowers, carrying out their light allotted tasks, and for the rest, living as they would and loving those they would, especially their children, of whom they had many. By nature and tradition the men were warriors and hunters, being skilled in the use of the bow and always at war when they could find anyone to fight. Indeed, when we came among them their trouble was that they had no enemies left, and at once they implored Bez to lead them out to battle, since they were weary of herding kine and tilling fields. All of these things I found out by degrees. Also that they were a great people who could send out an army of 70,000 men and yet leave enough behind them to defend their land. Of the world beyond their borders, the most of them knew little, but the learned men of whom I have spoken a great deal, since they traveled to Egypt and elsewhere to study the customs of other countries. For the rest, their only god was the grasshopper, and like that insect they skipped and chirruped through life, and when the winter of death came, sprang away to another of which they knew nothing, leaving their young behind them to bask in the sun of unborn summers. Such were the Ethiopians. Now of all the ceremonies of the reception of Bez and his re-crowning as Karun, I knew little, for the reason that the tooth of the crocodile poisoned my blood and made me very ill, so that I remained for a moon or more lying in a fine room in the palace where the gold seemed to be as plentiful as earthen pots are in Egypt, and all the vessels were of crystal. Had it not been for the skill of the Ethiopian leeches, and above all for the nursing of my mother, I think that I must have died. She it was who withstood them when they wished to cut off my arm, and wisely, for it recovered and was as strong as it had ever been. In the end I grew well again, and from the platform in front of the temple was presented to the people by Bez as his savior and the next greatest to him in the kingdom, nor shall I ever forget the shoutings with which I was received. Karima also was presented as his wife, having passed the ordeal of the matrons, but only, I think, because it was found that she was in the way to give an heir to the throne. For to them her beauty was ugliness, nor could they understand how it came about that their king, who, contrary to the general customs of the land, was only allowed one wife, lest the children should quarrel, could have chosen a lady who was not black. So they received her in silence with many whisperings which made Karima very angry. When in due course, however, the child came and proved to be a son black as the best of them and of perfect shape, they relented towards her, and after the birth of a second grew to love her, but she never forgave and loved them not at all. Nor was she over fond of these children of hers because they were so black, which, she said, showed how poisonous was the blood of the Ethiopians. And indeed this was so, for often I have noticed that if an Ethiopian weds one of another color, their offspring is black down to the 3rd or 4th generation. Therefore Karima longed for Egypt, notwithstanding the splendor in which she dwelt. So greatly did she long that she had recourse to the magic lore which she had learned from the holy Tanofir, and would sit for hours gazing into water in a crystal bowl, or sometimes into a ball of crystal without the water, trying to see visions therein that had to do with what passed in Egypt. Moreover, in time, much of her gift returned to her, and she did see many things which she repeated to me, for she would tell no one else of them, not even her husband. Thus she saw Amada kneeling in a shrine before the statue of Isis and weeping, a picture that made me sad. Also, she saw the holy Tanofir brooding in the darkness of a cave of the bulls, and read in his mind that he was thinking of us, though what he thought she could not read. Again, she saw Eastern messengers delivering letters to Pharaoh, and knew from his face that he was disturbed and that Egypt was threatened with calamities, and so forth. Soon the news of her powers of divination spread abroad, so that all the Ethiopians grew to fear her as a seeress, and thenceforth, whatever they might have thought, none of them dared to say that she was ugly. Further, her gift was real, since if she told me of a certain thing, such as that messengers were approaching, in due course they would arrive and make clear much that she had not been able to understand in her visions. Now from the time that I grew strong again, and as soon as Bez was firmly seated on his throne, he and I set to work to train and drill the army of the Ethiopians, which hitherto had been little more than a mob of men carrying bows and swords. We divided it into phalanxes, after the Greek fashion, and armed these bodies with long lances, swords, and large shields in the place of the small ones they had carried before. Also, we trained the archers, teaching them to advance in open order and shoot from cover, and lastly chose the best soldiers to be captains and generals. So it came about that at the end of the 2 years that I spent in Ethiopia there was a force of 60,000 men or more whom I should not have been afraid to match against any troops in the world, since they were of great strength and courage, and, as I have said, by nature lovers of war. Also, their bows being longer and more powerful, they could shoot arrows farther than the Easterns or the Egyptians. The Ethiopian lords wondered why their king and I did these things, since they saw no enemy against which so great an army could be led to battle. On that matter Bez and I kept our own counsel, telling them only that it was good for the men to be trained to war, since, hearing of their wealth, one day the King of Kings might attempt to invade their country. So month by month I labored at this task, leading armies into distant regions to accustom them to traveling far afield, carrying with them what was necessary for their sustenance. So it went on, until a sad thing happened. Since returning from one of these forays, in which I had punished a tribe that had murdered some Ethiopian hunters, and we had taken many thousands of their cattle, I found my mother dying. She had been smitten by a fever which was common in that season of the year, and being old and weak, had no strength to throw it off. As medicine did not help her, the priests of the Grasshopper prayed day and night in their temple for her recovery. Yes, there they prayed to a golden locust standing on an altar in a sanctuary that was surrounded by crystal coffins, wherein rested the flesh of former kings of the land. To me the sight was pitiful, but Bez asked me what was the difference between praying to a locust and praying to images with the heads of beasts, or to a dwarf shaped as he was like we did in Egypt, and I could not answer him. "The truth is, brother," he said, for so he called me now, "that all the peoples in the world do not offer petitions to what they see and have been taught to revere, but to something beyond of which to them it is a sign. But why the Ethiopians should have chosen a grasshopper as a symbol of God, who is everywhere, is more than I can tell. Still, they have done so for thousands of years." When I came to my mother's bedside, she was wandering, and I saw that she could not live long. In a little while, however, her mind cleared so that she knew me, and tears of joy ran down her pale cheeks because I had returned before she died. She reminded me that she had always said that she would find a grave in Ethiopia and be asked to be buried and not kept above ground in crystal, as was the custom there. Then she said that she had been dreaming of my father and of me, and that she did not think that I need fret myself overmuch about Amada, since she was sure that before long I should kiss her on the lips. I asked if she meant that I should marry her and that we should be happy and fortunate. She replied that she supposed that I should marry her, but of the rest would say nothing. Indeed, her face grew troubled, as though some thought hurt her. And leaving the matter of Amada, she bade Karima bring me the rose-hued pearls, blessed me, prayed for our reunion in the halls of Osiris, and straightway died. So I caused her to be embalmed after the Egyptian fashion and enclosed in a coffin of crystal with a scarab on her heart that Karima had discovered somewhere in the city, for always she was searching for things that reminded her of Egypt, whereof many were to be found brought from time to time by travelers or strangers. Then, with such ceremony as we could, without the services of the priests of Osiris, Karima and I buried her in a tomb that Bez had caused to be made near the steps of the temple of the grasshopper, while Bez and his nobles watched from a distance. And so farewell to my beloved mother, the Lady Tiu. After she was gone, I grew very sad and lonely. While she lived, I had a home, but now I was in exile, a stranger in a strange land, with no one of my own people to talk to except Karima, with whom, as there were gossips even in Ethiopia, I thought it well not to talk too much. There was Bez, it was true, but now he was a great king, and the time of kings is not their own. Moreover, Bez was Bez, and an Ethiopian, and I was I, and an Egyptian, and therefore, notwithstanding our love and brotherhood, we could never be like men of the same blood and country. I grew weary of Ethiopia with its useless gold and damp eternal green and heat, and longed for the sand and the keen desert air. Bez noted it and offered me wives, but I shrank from these black women, however buxom and kindly, and wished for no offspring of their race whom afterwards I could never leave. To Egypt I had sworn not to return unless one voice called me, and I remained silent. What then was I to do, being no longer content to discipline and command an army that I might not lead into battle? At length I made up my mind. By nature I was a hunter as much as a soldier. I would beg from Bez a band of brave men whom I knew, lovers of adventure who sought new things, and with them strike down south, following the path of the elephants to wherever the gods might lead us. Doubtless in the end it would be to death, but what matter when there is nothing for which one cares to live? While I was brooding over these plans, Karima read my mind, perhaps because it was her own, perhaps by help of her strange arts, which I do not know. At least one day when I was sitting alone looking at the city beneath from one of the palace window places, she came to me, looking very beautiful and very mystic in the white robe she always loved to wear, and said, "My lord Shabaka, you tire of this land of honey and sweetness and soft airs and flowers and gold and crystal and black people who grin and chatter and are not pleasant to be near, is it not so?" "Yes, Queen," I answered. "Do not call me Queen, my lord Shabaka, for I weary of that name, as we both do of the rest. Call me Karima the Arab, or Karima the Cup, which you will. But by the name of Thoth, god of learning, do not call me Queen." "Karima, then," I said. "Well, how do you know that I tire of all this, Karima?" "How could you do otherwise who are not a barbarian, and who have Egypt in your heart, and Egypt's fate, and—" here she looked me straight in the eyes, "Egypt's lady. Besides, I measure you by myself." "You at least should be happy, Karima, who are great and rich and beloved, and the wife of a king who is one of the best of men, and the mother of children." Yes, Shabaka, I should be, but I am not. For who can live on sweetmeats only, especially when they like what is sour? See now how strangely we are made. When I was a girl, the daughter of an Arab chief, well bred and well taught as it chanced, I tired of the hard life of the desert and the narrow minds about me, I who longed for wisdom and to know great men. Then I became the cup of the holy Tanofir, and wisdom was all about me. Strange wisdom from another world, rough, sharp wisdom from Tanofir, and the quiet wisdom of the dead among whom I dwelt. I wearied of that also, Shabaka. I was beautiful and knew it, and I longed to shine in a court and be admired among men, and to be envied of women, to rule. My husband came my way. He was clever with a great heart. He was your friend, and therefore I was sure that he must be loyal and true. He was, or might be, a king, as I knew, though he thought that I did not. I married him, and the holy Tanofir laughed, but he did not say me nay, and I became a queen. And now I wish sometimes that I were dead, or back holding the cup of the holy Tanofir, with the wisdom of the heavens flowing round about me and the soft darkness of the tombs about me. It seems that in this world we never can be content, Shabaka. No, Karima. We only think that we should be if things were otherwise than they are. But how can I help you, Karima? Least of all by going away and leaving me alone, she answered with the tears starting to her eyes. Looking at her, I began to think that the best thing I could do would be to go away and at once. But as ever she read my thought, shook her head and laughed. No, no, I have put on my yoke and will carry it to the end. Have I not 2 black children and a husband who is a hero, a wit and a mountebank in one, and a throne and more gold and crystal than I could ever wish to see again, even in a dream? And shall I not cling to these good things? If you went, I should only be a little more unhappy than before, that is all. Not for my sake do I ask you to stay, but for your own. How for my own, Karima? I have done all that I can do here. I have built the army afresh from cook boys to generals. Bez needs me no longer, who has you, his children, and his country, and I die of weariness. You can stop to make use of that army you have built afresh, Shabaka. Against whom? There are none to fight. Against the great king of the East. Listen, my gift of vision has grown strong and clear of late. Only today I have been seeing a meeting between Pharaoh, the holy Tanofir, and the lady Amada. They were all disturbed, I know not at what, and the end of it was that Amada wrote in a roll and gave the writing to messengers, who I think even now are speeding southward, to you, Shabaka. Nay, do not look doubtfully on me, it is true. Then you did well to tell me, Karima, for within a moon of this day I should have been where perhaps no messengers would have found me. Now I will wait, and let it be your part to prepare the mind of Bez. Do you think he would give me an army to lead to Egypt if there were need? She nodded and answered, He would do so for 3 reasons. The first is because he loves you. The second, because he too wearies of Ethiopia and this rich, fat life of peace. And the third, because I shall tell him that he must. Then why trouble to speak of the other 2? I said, laughing. So I stayed on in the city of the grasshopper and busied myself with the questions of how to transport and feed a great army that must hold the field for 6 months or a year. Also with the setting of hundreds of skilled men to the making of bows, arrows, swords, and shields. Nor did Bez say me no in these matters. Indeed, he helped them forward by issuing the orders as his own, wherein I saw the hand of Karima. 3 months went by, and I began to think that Karima's power had been at fault, or that her vision was one that came from her lips and not from her heart, to keep me in Ethiopia. But again she read my mind and smiled. Not so, Shabaka, she said. Those messengers have come to trouble, and are detained by a petty tribe beyond our borders over some matter of a woman. 10 days ago the frontier guards marched to set them free. So again I waited, And at length the messengers came, 3 of them Egyptians and 3 men of Ethiopia who dwelt in Egypt to learn its wisdom, reporting that, as Karima had said, through the foolishness of a servant they had been held prisoner by an Arab chief and thus delayed. Then they delivered the writings which they had kept safe. One was from Pharaoh to Karun of Ethiopia, one was from the holy Tanofir to Karima, and one from the lady Amada to myself. With a trembling hand I broke the silk seals and read. It ran thus: Shabaka, my cousin, you departed from Egypt, saying that never would you return unless I, Amada the priestess, called you, and I told you that I should never call. You said, moreover, that if you came at my call, you would demand me in guerdon, and I told you that I never would give myself to you who was doubly sworn to Isis. Yet now I call, and now I say that if you come and conquer, and I yet live, then, if you still will it, I am yours. Thus stands the case. The great king advances upon Egypt with an army countless as the sands, nor can Egypt hope to battle against him unaided and alone. He comes to make of her a slave, to kill her children, to burn her temples, to sack her cities and defile her gods with blasphemies. Moreover, he comes to seize me and to drag me away to shame in his house of women. Therefore, for the sake of the gods, for Egypt's sake, and for my own, I pray that you come and save us. Moreover, I still love you, Shabaka. Yes, more than 1,000 times than ever I did. Though whether you still love me, I know not. For that love's sake, therefore, I am ready to break my vows to Isis and to dare her vengeance, if she should desire to be venged upon me, who would save her and her worship, praying that it may fall on my head and not on yours. This will I do by the counsel of the holy Tanofir, by command of Pharaoh, and with the consent of the high priests of Egypt. Now I, Amada, have written. Choose, Shabaka, beloved of my heart. Such was the letter that caused my head to swim and set my soul on fire. Still I said nothing, but thrust it into my robe and waited. Presently Bez, who had been reading in his roll, looked up and spoke, saying, Are you minded to see arrows fly and swords shine in war, brother? If so, there is opportunity. Pharaoh writes to me above his own seal, seeking an alliance between Egypt and Ethiopia. He says that the King of Kings invades him, and that if he conquers Egypt, he has sworn to travel and conquer Ethiopia also, since he learns that it is now ruled by a certain dwarf who once stole his white signet, and by a certain Egyptian who once killed his satrap Idunus. What says the Karun? I asked. Bez rolled his eyes and, turning to Karima, asked, What says the Karun's wife? Karima laid down the roll she had been studying and answered, She says that she has received a command from her master, the holy Tanofir, to wait upon him forthwith, for reasons that he will explain when she arrives, or to brave his curse upon her, her children, her country, and her husband, and not only this, but that of the spirits who serve him. The curse of the holy Tanofir is nothing to mock at, said Bez, as I who revere him know as well as any man. No, husband, and therefore I leave for Egypt as soon as may be. It seems that my sister is dead, this year past, and the holy Tanofir has no one to hold his cup. And what shall I do? Asked Bez. That is for you to say, husband. But if you will, you can stay here and guard our children, giving the command of your army to the Lord Shabaka. Now, for we were alone, Bez twisted himself about, rolling his eyes and laughing as he used to do before he became Karun of Ethiopia. Ho, 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 wife, he said. So you are to go to Egypt, leaving me to play the nurse to babies, and my brother here is to command my armies, leaving me to look after the old men and the women. Nay, I think otherwise. I think that I shall come also. That is, if my brother wishes it. Did he not save my life? And is it not his? And with it all I have. Oh, have done. Once more we will stand side by side in the battle, brother, and afterwards let fate do as it will with us. Tell me now, what is the tale of archers and of swordsmen with which we can march against the great king, with whom, like you, I have a score to settle?" 75,000, I answered. "Good. On the 5th day from now, the army marches for Egypt." End of chapter 15. Chapter 16 of The Ancient Allan by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 16. Tanofir finds his broken cup. March we did, but on the 15th day, not the 5th, since there was much to make ready. First the council of the Ethiopians must be consulted, and through them the people. In the beginning there was trouble over the matter, since many were against a distant war, and this even after Bez had urged that it was better to attack than to wait to be attacked. For they answered, and justly, that here in Ethiopia distance and the desert were their shields, since the King of Kings, however great his strength, would be weary and famished before he set foot within their borders. In the end the knot was cut with a sword, for when the army came to learn of the dispute, from the generals down to the common soldiers, every man clamored to be led to war, since, as I have said, these Ethiopians were fighters, all of them, and near at hand there were none left with whom they could fight. So when the council came to see that they must choose between war abroad and revolt at home, they gave way, bargaining only that the children of the Karun should not leave the land, so that if aught befell him, there would be some of the true blood left to succeed. Also the grasshopper was consulted by the priests, who found the omens favorable. Indeed, it was told that this great golden locust sat upon its hind legs upon the altar and waved its feelers in the air, which only happened when wonderful fortune was about to bless the land. The tale reminded me of the nodding of the statues of our own gods in Egypt when a new pharaoh was presented to them, and that of Isis when Amada put up her prayer to the Divine Mother. To tell the truth, I suspected Karima of having some hand in the business. However, so it happened. At length we set forth, a mighty host, Bez commanding the swordsmen, and I under him the archers, of whom there were more than 30,000 men, and glad was I when all the farewells were said and we were free of the weeping crowds of women. At first Bez and Karima were somewhat sad at parting from their children, but in a little while they grew gay again, since the one longed for battle and the other for the sands of Egypt. Now, for our advance I need say little, except that it was slow, though none dared to bar the road of so mighty an array. Since we must go on foot, we were not able to cover more than 5 leagues in a day, for even after we reached the river, boats could not be found for so many, though Karima traveled in one with her ladies. Also, cattle and corn must always be sent forward for food. Still we crept on to Egypt without sickness, accident, or revolt. When we drew near to its frontiers, messengers met us from Pharaoh, bearing letters in answer to those which we had sent with the tidings of our coming. These contained little but ill news. It seemed that the great king, with a countless host, had taken all the cities of the Delta, and, after a long siege, had captured Memphis and put it to the sack, and that the army of Egypt, fighting desperately by land and upon the Nile, was being driven southwards towards Thebes. Pharaoh added that he proposed to make his last stand at the strong city of Amada, since he doubted whether the troops from Lower Egypt would not rather surrender to the Easterns than retreat further up the Nile. He thanked and blessed us for our promised aid, and prayed that it might come in time to save Egypt from slavery and himself from death. Also, there was a letter for me from Amada, in which she said, "Oh, come quickly, beloved Shabaka, lest of me you should find but bones, for never will I fall, living, into the hands of the great king. We are sore pressed, and although Amada has been made very strong, it can stand but a little while against such a countless multitude armed with all the engines of war." For Karima, too, there were messages from the holy Tanofir of the same meeting, saying that unless we appeared within a moon of their receipt, all was lost. We read and took counsel. Then we pressed forward by double marches, sending swift runners forward to bid Pharaoh and his army hold on to the last spear and arrow. On the 25th day from the receipt of this news, we came to the great frontier city, which we found in tumult, for its citizens were mad with fear. Here we rested one night and ate of the food that was gathered there in plenty. Then, leaving a small rear guard of 5,000 men who were tired out to hold the place, we pressed onwards, for Amada was still 4 days' march away. On the morning of the 4th day we were told that it was falling, or had fallen, and when at length we came in sight of the place we saw that it was beleaguered by an innumerable host of Easterns, while on the Nile was a great fleet of Grecian and Cyprian mercenaries. Moreover, heralds from the King of Kings reached us, saying, "Surrender, barbarians, or before the 2nd day dawns you shall sleep sound, every one of you." To these we answered that we would take counsel on the matter, and that perhaps on the morrow we would surrender, since when we had marched from Ethiopia we did not know how great was the king's strength, having been deceived as to it by the letters of Pharaoh. Meanwhile, that the King of Kings would do well to let us alone, since we were brave men and meant to die hard, and it would be better for him to leave us to march back to Ethiopia rather than lose an army trying to kill us. With these words, which were spoken by Bez himself, the messengers departed. One of them, however, who seemed to be a great lord, called in a loud voice to his companions, saying it was hard that nobles should have to do the errands, not of a man, but of an ape, who would look better hanging to a pole. Bez made no answer, only rolled his yellow eyes, and said, when the lord was out of hearing, "Now, by the grasshopper and all the gods of Egypt, I swear that in payment for this insult I will choke the Nile with the army of the great king, and hang that knave to a pole from the prow of the royal ship," which last thing I hope he did. When the embassy had gone, Bez gave orders that the whole army should eat and lie down to sleep. "I am sure," said he, "that the great king will not attack us at once, since he will hope that we shall flee away during the night, having seen his strength." So the Ethiopians filled themselves and lay down to sleep, which these people can do at any time, even if not tired as they were. But while they rested, Bez and I and Karima, with some of the generals, consulted together long and earnestly. For in truth we knew not what to do. But a league away lay the town of Amada, beset by hundreds of thousands of the Easterns, so that none could come in or out. And within its walls were the remains of Pharaoh's army, not more than 20,000 men, all told, if what we heard were true. On the Nile also was a great Grecian and Cyprian fleet, 200 vessels and more, though as we could see by the light of the setting sun that most of these were made fast to the western bank where the Egyptians could not come at them. For the rest, our position was good, being on high desert beyond the cultivated land which bordered the eastern bank. But in front of us, separating us from the southern army of the king, stretched a swamp hard to cross, so that we could not hope to make an attack by night, as there was no moon. Lastly, the main eastern strength, to the number of 200,000 or more, lay to the north beyond Amada. All these things we considered, talking low and earnestly there in the tent, till it grew so dark that we could not see each other's faces, while behind us slumbered our army that now numbered some 70,000 men. "We are in a trap," said Bez at length. "If we wait attack, they will weigh us down with numbers. If we flee, they have camels and horses and will overtake us, also ships of which we have none. If we attack, it must be without cover, through swamp, or we shall be bogged. Meanwhile, Pharaoh is perishing within yonder walls of Amada, which the engines batter down. By the grasshopper, I know not what to do. It seems that our journey is vain, and that few of us will see Ethiopia more. Also, that Egypt is sped." I made no answer, for here my generalship failed me, and I had nothing to say. The captains, too, were silent. Only woman-like, Karima wept a little, and I, too, went near to weeping, who thought of Amada penned in yonder temple like a lamb that awaits the butcher's knife. Suddenly, coming from the door of the tent, which I thought was closed, I heard a deep voice say, "I have ever noted that those of Ethiopian blood were melancholy after sundown, though of Egyptians I had thought better things." Now about this voice there was something familiar to me. Still I said nothing, nor did the others, for, to speak the truth, all of us were frightened and thought that we must dream. For how could anything that breathed approach this tent through the triple line of sentries? So we sat still, staring at the darkness, till presently in that darkness appeared a glow of light, such as comes from the fireflies of Ethiopia. It grew and grew while we gasped with fear, until presently it took shape, and the shape it took was that of the ancient withered face, the sightless eyes, and the white beard of the holy Tanofir. Yes, there, not 2 feet from the ground, seemed to float the head of the holy Tanofir, limned in faint flame, which I suppose must have been reflected on to it from the light of some campfire without. "Oh, my beloved master!" cried Karima, and threw herself towards him. "Oh, my beloved cup!" answered Tanofir. "Glad am I to know you well and unshattered." Then a torch was lit, and lo, there before us, wrapped in his dark cloak, sat the holy Tanofir. "Whence come you, my great uncle?" I asked, amazed. "From less far than you, nephew," he answered, "namely, out of Amada yonder. Oh, ask me not how. It is easy if you are a blind old beggar who knows the path. And, by the way, if you have aught to eat, I should be glad of a bite and a sup, since in Amada food has been scarce for this last month, and tonight there is little left." Karima sped from the tent, and presently returned with bread and wine, of which Tanofir partook almost greedily. "This is the first strong drink I have tasted for many a year," he said as he drained the goblet. "But better a broken vow than broken wits when one has much to plan and do. At least I hope the gods will think so when I meet them presently. There, I am strong again. Now, say, what is your force?" We told him. "Good. And what is your plan?" We shook our heads, having none. "Bez," he said sternly, "I think you grow dull since you became a king, or perhaps it is marriage that makes you so. Why, in bygone years, schemes would have come so fast that they would have choked each other between those thick lips of yours. And Shabaka, tell me, have you lost all your generalship, whereof once you had plenty, in the soft air of Ethiopia? Or is it that even the shadow of marriage makes you dull? Well, I must turn to the woman, for that is always the lot of man. Your plan, Karima, and quickly, for there is no time to lose." Now the face of Karima grew fixed, and her eyes dreamy, as she spoke in a slow, measured voice, like one who knows not what she says. "My plan is to destroy the armies of the great king and relieve the city of Amada." "Very good plan," said the holy Tanofir, "but the question is, how?" "I think," went on Karima, "that about a league above this place there is a spot where at this season the Nile can be forded by tall men without the wetting of their shoulders. First, then, I would send 5,000 swordsmen across that ford and let them creep down on the navy of the great king where the sailors revel in safety or sleep sound, and fire the ships. The wind blows strongly from the south, and the flames will leap fast from one of them to the other. Most of their crews will be burned, and the rest can be slain by our 5,000. "Good, very good," said the holy Tanofir, "but not enough, seeing that on the eastern bank is gathered the host of over 200,000 men. Now, how will you deal with them, Karima?" "I seem to see a road yonder beyond the swamp. It runs on the edge of the desert, but behind the sand hills. I would send the archers, of whom there are more than 30,000, under the command of Shabaka, along that road which leads them past Amada. On its farther side are low hills strewn with rocks. Here I would let the archers take cover and wait for the breaking of the dawn. Then beneath them they will see the most of the eastern host, and with such bows as ours they can sweep the plain from the hills almost to the Nile, and having 100 arrows to a man should slaughter the Easterns by the 10,000, for when these turn to charge, a shaft should pierce through 2 together." "Good again," said Tanofir. "But what of the army of the great king which lies upon this side of Amada?" "I think that before dawn, believing us so few, it will advance, and with the first light begin to thread the swamp, and therefore we must keep 5,000 archers to gall it as it comes. Still it will win through, though with loss, and find us waiting for it here, shoulder to shoulder, rank upon rank, with locked shields, against which horse and foot shall break in vain. For who shall drive a wedge through the Ethiopian squares that Shabaka has trained and that Bez, the Karun, commands? I say that they shall roll back like waves from a cliff, yes, again and again, growing ever fewer, till the clamour of battle and the shouts of fear and agony reach their ears from beyond Amada, where Shabaka and the archers do their work, and the sight of burning ships strikes terror in them, and they fly." "Good again," said the holy Tanofir. "But still many on both fronts will be left, for this army of Easterns is very vast. And how will you deal with those, O Karima?" "On these I would have Pharaoh, with all his remaining strength, pour from the northern and southern gates of Amada, for so shall they be caught like wounded lions between 2 wild bulls, and torn and trampled and utterly destroyed. Only I know not how to tell Pharaoh what he must do and when." "Good again," said the holy Tanofir. "Very good. And as for the telling of Pharaoh, well, I shall see him presently. It is strange, my chipped cup, which I had almost thrown away as useless, that although broken, you still hold so much wisdom. For know, wonderful though it may seem, that just such plans as you have spoken have grown up in my own mind, only I wish to learn if you thought them wise." Then he laughed a little, and Karima stretched her arms as one does who awakes from sleep, rubbed her eyes, and asked if he would not eat more food. In an instant Tanofir was speaking again in a quick, clear voice. "Bez, or king," he said, "doubtless you will do your wife's will. Therefore, let the host be aroused and stand to its arms. It chances I have 4 men without who can be trusted. 2 of these will guide the 5,000 to the ford and across it, also down upon the ships. The other 2 will guide Shabaka and the archers along the road which Karima remembers so well. Perhaps she trod it as a child. For my part, I return to Amada to make sure that Pharaoh does his share and at the right time. For mark, unless all this is carried through tonight, Amada will fall tomorrow. A certain priestess will die, and you, Bez, and your soldiers will never look upon Ethiopia again. Is it agreed?" I nodded, who did not wish to waste time in words, and Bez rolled his eyes and answered, "When one can think of nothing, it is best to follow the counsel of those who can think of something. Also to hunt rather than to be hunted. Especially is this so if that something comes from the holy Tanofir or his broken cup. Generals, you have heard. Rouse the host and bid them stand to their arms, company by company." The generals leapt away into the darkness like arrows from a bow, and presently we heard the noise of gathering men. "Where are these guides of yours, holy Tanofir?" asked Bez. Tanofir beckoned over his shoulder, and out of the gloom, one by one, 4 men stole into the tent. They were strange, quiet men, but I can say no more of them, since their faces were veiled, nor, as it chances, did I ever see any of them after the battle, in which I suppose that they were killed. Or perhaps they appeared after... well, never mind. "You have heard?" said Tanofir, whereupon all 4 of them bowed their mysterious, veiled heads. "Now, my brother," whispered Bez into my ear, "tell me, I pray you, how did 4 men who were not in the tent hear what was said in this tent, and how did they come through the guards who have orders to kill anyone who does not know the countersign, especially men whose faces were wrapped in napkins?" "I do not know. I answered, whereon Bez groaned. Only Karima smiled a little as though to herself. Then, having heard, obey, said the holy Tanofir, whereon the 4 veiled ones bowed again. Will you not give them their orders, most venerable? Inquired Bez doubtfully. I think it is needless, said Tanofir in a dry voice. Why try to teach those who know? Will you not offer them something to eat, since they also must be hungry? I asked of Karima. Fool, be silent, she replied, looking on me with contempt. Do the friends of Tanofir need to eat? I should have thought so after being beleaguered for a month in a starving town. If the master wants to eat, why should not his men? I murmured. Then a thought struck me, and I was silent. A general returned and reported that the orders had been executed and that all the army was afoot. Good, said Bez. Then start forthwith with 5,000 men and burn those ships, according to the plan laid down by the Queen Karima, which you heard her speak but now. And he named certain regiments that he should take with him, those of a general's own command, adding, Save some of the ships if you can, and afterwards cross the Nile in them with your men, and join yourself either to my force or to that of the Lord Shabaka, according to what you see. May the grasshopper give you victory and wisdom. The general saluted and asked, Who guides us to and across the ford of the great river? 2 of the veiled men stepped forward, whereon the general muttered into my ear, I do not like the look of them. I pray the grasshopper they do not guide us across the river of death. Have no fear, general, said the holy Tanofir from the other end of the tent. If you and your men play their parts as well as the guides will play theirs, the ships are already burned together with their companies. Only take fire with you. So the general departed with the 2 guides, looking somewhat frightened, and soon was marching up Nile at the head of 5,000 swordsmen. Now Bez looked at me and said, It seems that you had better be gone also, my brother, with the archers. Perchance the holy Tanofir will show you whither. No, no, answered Tanofir. My guides will show him. Look not so doubtful, Shabaka. Did I fail you when you were in the grip of the King of Kings in the East, and only your own life and that of Bez were at stake? I do not know, I answered. You do not know, but I know, as I think do Bez and Karima, since the one received the messages from the other sent. Well, if I did not fail you then, shall I fail you now when Egypt is at stake? Follow these guides I give you, and—" Here he took hold of the quiver of arrows that lay beside me on the ground, and as certainly as though he could see it with his blind eyes, touched one of them, on the shaft of which were 2 black and a white feather. Remember my words after you have loosed this arrow from your great black bow and noted where it strikes. Then I turned to Bez and asked, Where do we meet again? I cannot say, brother, he answered. In Amada, if it may be, if not, at the table of Osiris, or in the fields of the grasshopper, or in the blackness which swallows all, gods and men together. Does Karima come with me, or abide with you? I asked again. She does neither, interrupted Tanofir. She accompanies me to Amada, where I have need of her, and she will be more safe. Oh, fear nothing, for every hermit, however poor, still carries his staff and his cup, even if it be cracked. Then I shook Bez by the hand and went my way, wondering if I were awake or dreaming, and the last thing I saw in that tent was the beautiful face of Karima smiling at me. This I took to be a good omen, since I knew that it was the heart of the holy Tanofir which smiled, and that her eyes were but its mirror. Already my 30,000 archers were marshalling, and having made sure that there was ample store of arrows, and that all their gourds were filled with water, I set myself at their head, while in front of me walked the 2 veiled guides. I looked upon them doubtfully, since it seemed dangerous to trust an army to unknown men who, for aught I knew, might lead us into the midst of our foes. Then I remembered that they were vouched for by the holy Tanofir, my own great uncle, whom I trusted above any man on earth, and took heart again. How had he come into our tent, I wondered, and how, blind as he was, would he get back to Amada with Karima if he took her? Well, who could account for the goings or the comings of the holy Tanofir, who was more of a spirit than a man? Perhaps it was not really he whom we had seen, but what we Egyptians called his ka, or double, which can pass to and fro at will. Only, do kas eat? Of this matter I knew only that offerings of food and drink were made to them in tombs. So, leaving the holy Tanofir to guard himself, I turned my mind to our own business, which was to surprise the army of the great king. Skirting the swamp, we came to rough and higher ground, and though I could see little in that darkness, I knew that we were walking up a hill. Presently we crossed its crest, and descending for 3 bow shots or so, I felt my feet were on a road. Now the guides turned to the left, and after them in a long line came my army of 30,000 archers. In utter silence we went, since we had no beasts with us, and our sandaled feet made little noise. Moreover, orders had been passed down the line that the man who made a sound should die. For 2 hours or more we marched thus, then bore to the left again and climbed a slope, by which time I judged that we must be well past the town of Amada. Here, suddenly, the guides halted, and we after them at whispered words of command. One of them took me by the cloak, led me forward a little way to the crest of the ridge, and pointed with his white-sleeved arm. I looked, and there beneath me, well within bow-shot, were thousands of the watchfires of the king's army, flaring, some of them, in the strong wind. For a full league those fires burned, and we were opposite to the midmost of them. "See now, General Shabaka," said the guide, speaking for the first time in a curious hissing whisper, such as might come from a man who had no lips. "Beneath you sleeps the eastern host, which, being so great, has not thought it needful to guard this ridge. Now marshal your archers on a 4-fold line in such fashion that at first break of dawn they can take cover behind the rocks and shoot, every man of them without piercing his fellow. Do you bide here with the center, where your standard can be seen by all to north and south. I and my companion will lead your vanguard farther on to where the ridge draws nearer to the Nile, so that with their arrows they can hold back and slay any who strive to escape downstream. The rest is in your hands, for we are guides, not generals. Summon your captains and issue your commands." So we went back again, and I called the officers together and told them what they were to do, then dispatched them to their regiments. Presently the vanguard of 10,000 men drew away and vanished, and with them the white-robed guides on whom I never looked again. Then I marshaled my center as well as I could in the gloom, and bade them lie down to rest and sleep if they were able. Also, within 30 minutes of the sunrise, to eat and drink a little of the food they carried, to see that every bow was ready and that the arrows were loosened in every quiver. This done, with a few of whom I trusted to serve me as messengers and guard, I crept up to the brow of the hill or slope, and there we laid us down and watched. End of chapter 16. Chapter 17 of The Ancient Allan by H. Rider Haggard. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 17. The Battle and After. 2 hours went by, and I knew by the stars that the dawn could not be far away. My eyes were fixed upon the Nile, and on the lights that hung to the prows of the great king's ships. Where were those who had been sent to fire them, I wondered? For of them I saw nothing. Well, their journey would be long, as they must wade the river. Perhaps they had not yet arrived, or perhaps they had miscarried. At least the fleet seemed very quiet. None were alarmed there, and no sentry challenged. At length it grew near to dawn, and behind me I heard the gentle stir of the Ethiopians arising and eating as they had been bidden, whereon I too ate and drank a little, though never had I less wished for food. The east brightened, and far up the Nile of a sudden there appeared what at first I took to be a meteor or a lantern waving in the wind that now was blowing its strongest, as it does at this season of the year just at the time of dawn. Yet that lantern seemed to travel fast, and lo, now I saw that it was fire running up the rigging of a ship. It leapt from rope to rope and from sail to sail till they blazed fiercely, and in other ships also nearer to us. Flame appeared that grew to a great red sheet. Our men had not failed. The navy of the King of Kings was burning. Oh, how it burned, fanned by the breath of that strong wind. From vessel to vessel leapt the fire like a thing alive, for all of them were drawn up on the bank with prows fastened in such fashion that they could not readily be made loose. Some broke away indeed, but they were aflame and only served to spread the fire more quickly. Before the rim of the sun appeared for a league or more, there was nothing but blazing ships, from which rose a hideous crying, and still more and more took fire lower down the line. I had no time to watch, for now I must be up and doing. The sky grew gray. There was light enough to see, though faintly. I cast my eyes about me and perceived that no place in the world could have been better for archery. In front the hill was steep for 100 paces or more and scattered over with thousands of large stones, behind which bowmen might take shelter. Then came a gentle slope of loose sand, up which attackers would find it hard to climb. Then the long flat plain whereon the Easterns were camped, and beyond it, scarce 2 furlongs away, the banks of the Nile. Indeed, the place was ill chosen for so great an army, nor could it have held them all, had not the camping ground been a full league in length, and even so they were crowded. Out of the mist their tents appeared, thousands of them, farther than my eye could reach, and almost opposite to me, near to the banks of the river, was a great pavilion of silk and gold that I guessed must shelter the majesty of the King of Kings. Indeed, this was certain, since now I saw that over it floated his royal banner which I knew so well, I who had stolen the little white signet of signets from which it was taken. Surely the holy Tanofir, or his cup Karima, or his messengers, or the spirits with whom he dwelt, I know not which, had a general's eye and knew how to plan an ambuscade. So thought I to myself as I ran back to my army to meet the gathered captains and set all things in order. It was soon done, for they were ready, as were the fierce Ethiopians, fresh from their rest and food, and stringing their bows, every one of them, or loosening the arrows in their quivers. As I came, they lifted their hands in salute, for speak they dared not, and I sent a whisper down their ranks, that this day they must fight and conquer, or fall for the glory of Ethiopia and their king. Then I gave my orders, and before the sun rose and revealed them, they crept forward in a fourfold line and took shelter behind the stones, lying there invisible on their bellies until the moment came. The red rim of Ra appeared glorious in the east, and I, from behind the rocks that I had chosen, sat down and watched. Oh, truly, Tanofir, the gods of Egypt were ordering things aright for us. The huge camp was awake now and aware of what was happening on the Nile. They could not see well because of the tall reeds upon the river's rim, and therefore, without order or discipline, by the 1,000 and 10,000, for their numbers were countless, some with arms and some without, they ran to the slope of sand beneath our station and began to climb it to have a better view of the burning ships. The sun leapt up swiftly as it does in Egypt. His glowing edge appeared over the crest of the hill, though the hollows beneath were still filled with shadow. The moment was at hand. I waited till I counted 10, glancing to the right and left of me to see that all were ready and to suffer the crowd to thicken on the slope, but not to reach the lowest rocks whither they were climbing. Then I gave the double signal that had been agreed. Behind me the banner of the golden grasshopper was raised upon a tall pole and broke upon the breeze. That was the first signal, whereat every man rose to his knees and set shaft on string. Next I lifted my bow, the black bow, the ancient bow that few save I could bend, and drew it to my ear. Far away, out of arrow reach, as most would have said, floated the great king's standard over his pavilion. At this I aimed, making allowance for the wind, and shot. The shaft leapt forward, seen in the sunlight, lost in the shadow, seen in the sunlight again, and lastly seen once more, pinning that golden standard against its pole. At the sight of the omen a roar went up that rolled to the right and left of us, a roar from 30,000 throats. Now it was lost in a sound like to the hissing of thunder rain in Ethiopia, the sound of 30,000 arrows rushing through the wind. Oh, they were well aimed, those arrows, for I had not taught the Ethiopians archery in vain. How many went down before them? The gods of Egypt know alone. I do not. All I know is that the long slope of sand which had been crowded with standing men was now thick with fallen men, many of whom lay as though they were asleep. For what male could resist the iron-pointed shafts driven by the strong bows of the Ethiopians? And this was but a beginning, for flight after flight those arrows sped till the air grew dark with them. Soon there were no more to shoot at on the slope, for these were down, and the order went to lift the bows and draw upon the camp, and especially upon the parks of baggage beasts. Presently these were down also, a rushing maddened to and fro. At last the eastern generals saw and understood. Orders were shouted, and in a mad confusion the scores of thousands who were unharmed rushed back towards the banks of the Nile, where our shafts could not reach them. Here they formed up in their companies and took counsel. It was soon ended, for all the vast mass of them, preceded by a cloud of archers, began to advance upon the hill. Now I passed a command to the Ethiopians, of whom so far not one had fallen, to lie low and wait. On came the glittering multitude of Easterns, gay with purple and gold, their mail and swords shining in the risen sun. On they came by squadron and by company, more than the eye could number. They reached the sand slope thick with their own dead and wounded, and paused a little because they could see no man, since the black bodies of the Ethiopians were hid behind the black stones, and the black bows did not catch the light. Then from a gorgeous group that I guessed hid the person of the great king, surrounded by his regiment of guards, 10,000 of them who were called immortals, messengers sprang forth, screaming the order to charge. The host began to climb the slippery sand slope, but still I held my hand till their endless lines were within 50 paces of us, and their arrows rattled harmlessly against our stones. Then I caused the banner of the grasshopper that had been lowered to be lifted thrice, and at the third lifting once more 30,000 arrows rushed forth to kill. They went down in lines and heaps, riddled through and through, but still others came on, for they fought under the eye of the great king, and to fly meant death with shame and torture. We could not kill them all, they were too many. We could not kill the half of them, for their foremost were within 10 paces of us, and since we must stand up to shoot, our men began to fall, also pierced with arrows. I caused the blast of retreat to be sounded on the ivory horn, and step by step we drew back to the crest of the ridge, shooting as we went. On the crest we reformed rapidly in a double line, standing as close as we could together, and my example was followed all down the ranks to the right and left. Then I bethought me of a plan that I had taught these archers again and again in Ethiopia. With a flag I signaled a command to stop shooting, and also passed the word down the line, so that presently no more arrows flew. The Easterns hesitated, wondering whether this were a trap, or if we lacked shafts, and meanwhile I sent messengers with certain orders to the vanguard, who sped away at speed behind the hill, running as they never ran before. Presently I heard a voice below cry out, "The great king commands that the barbarians be destroyed! Let the barbarians be destroyed!" Now with a roar they came on like a flood. I waited till they were within 20 paces of us, and shouted, "Shoot and fall!" The first line shot, and oh, fearful was its work, for not a shaft missed those crowded hosts, and many pinned two together. My archers shot and fell down, setting new arrows to the string as they fell, whereon the second line also shot over them. Then up we sprang and loosed again, and again fell down, whereon the second line once more poured in its deadly hail. Now the Easterns stayed their advance, for their front ranks lay prone, and those behind must climb over them if they could. Yes, standing there in glittering groups, they rocked and hesitated, although their officers struck them with swords and lances to drive them forward. Once more our front rank rose and loosed. Once more we dropped and let the shafts of the second speed over us. It was too much. Flesh and blood could not bear more of those arrows. Thousands upon thousands were down, and the rest began to flee in confusion. Then at my command the ivory horn sounded the charge. Every man slung his bow upon his back and drew his short sword. "On to them!" I cried and leapt forward. Like a black torrent we rushed down the hill, leaping over the dead and wounded. The retreat became a rout, since before these ebon, great-eyed warriors the soft Easterns did not care to stand. They fled, screaming, "These are devils! These are devils!" We were among them now, hacking and stabbing with the short swords upon their heads and backs. There was no need to aim the blow, they were so many. Like a huddled mob of cattle they turned and fled down the Nile. But my orders had reached the vanguard, and these, hidden in the growing crops on the narrow neck of swampy land between the hills and the Nile, met them with arrows as they came, also raked them from the steep cliffside. Their chariot wheels sank into the mud till the horses were slain. Their footmen were piled in heaps about them. Still, soon there was a mighty wall of dead and dying. And our center and rear guard came up behind. Oh, we slew and slew, till before the sun was an hour high over half the enemy of the great king was no more. Then we reformed, having suffered but little loss, and drank the water of the Nile. "All is not done," I cried, for the immortals still remained behind us, gathered in massed ranks about their king. Also, there were many thousands of others between these and the walls of Amada. And to the south of the city, yet a second army, that with which Bez had been left to deal. With what success I knew not. "Ethiopians," I shouted, "cease crying victories, since the battle is about to begin. Strike, and at once, before the Easterns find their heart again." So we advanced upon the immortals, all of us, for now the vanguard had joined our strength. In long lines we advanced over that blood-soaked plain, and as we came the great king loosed his remaining chariots against us. It availed him nothing, since the horses could not face our arrows, whereof, thanks be to the gods, I had prepared so ample a store, carried in bundles by lads. Scarce a chariot reached our lines, and those that did were destroyed, leaving us unbroken. The chariots were done with, and their drivers dead, but there still frowned the squares of the immortals. We shot at them till nearly all our shafts were spent, and, galled to madness, they charged. We did not wait for the points of those long spears, but ran in beneath them, striking with our short swords, and oh, grim and desperate was that battle! Since the Easterns were clad in mail and the Ethiopians had but short jerkins of bull's hide. Fight as we would, we were driven back. The fray turned against us, and we fell by hundreds. I bethought me of flight to the hills, since now we were outnumbered and very weary. But behold, when all seemed lost, a great shouting arose from Amada, and through her open gates poured forth all that remained of the army of Pharaoh, perhaps 18,000 or 20,000 men. I saw, and my heart rose again. "Stand firm!" I cried. "Stand firm!" And lo, we stood. The Egyptians were on them now, and in their midst I saw Pharaoh's banner. By degrees the battle swayed towards the banks of the Nile, we to the north, and the Egyptians to the south, and the Easterns between us. They were trying to turn our flank. Yes, and would have done it, had there not suddenly appeared upon the Nile a fleet of ships. At first I thought that we were lost, for these ships were from Greece and Cyprus, till I saw the banner of the grasshopper wave from a prow, and knew that they were manned by our 5,000 who had gone out to burn the fleet, but had saved these vessels. They beached, and from their crowded holds poured the 5,000, or those that were left of them, and ranging themselves upon the bank, raised their war shout and attacked the ends of the Eastern's lines. Now we charged for the last time, and the Egyptians charged from the south. Ha ha! The ranks of the immortals were broken at length. We were among them. I saw Pharaoh, his urious circlet on his helm. He was wounded and sore beset. A tall immortal rushed at him with a spear and drove it home. Pharaoh fell. I leapt over him and killed that Eastern with a blow upon the neck, but my sword shattered on his armor. The tide of battle rolled up and swept us apart, and I saw Pharaoh being carried away. Look, yonder was the great king himself, standing in a golden chariot, the great king in all his glory, whom last I had seen far away in the east. He knew me and shot at me with a bow, the bow he thought my own, shouting, "Die, dog of an Egyptian!" His arrow pierced my helm, but missed my head. I strove to come at him, but could not. The real rout began. The immortals were broken like an earthen jar. They retreated in groups, fighting desperately, and of these the thickest was around the great king. He whom I hated was about to escape me. He still had horses. He would fly down Nile, gain his reserves, and go away back to the east, where he would gather new and yet larger armies, since men in millions were at his command. Then he would return and destroy Egypt, when perchance there were no Ethiopians to help her, and perhaps after all drag Amada to his house of women. See, they were breaking through, and already I was far away with a wound on my breast, and a hurt leg, and a shattered sword. What could I do? My arrows were spent, and the bearers had none left to give me. No, there was one still in a quiver. I drew it out. On its shaft were 2 black feathers and 1 white. Who had spoken of that arrow? I remembered. Tanofir. I was to think of certain things that he said when I noted what it pierced. I unslung my bow, strung it, and set that arrow on the string. By now the great king was far away, out of reach for most archers, his chariot forging ahead amidst the remnant of his guards, and the nobles who attended on his sacred person traveled over a little rise where doubtless once there had been a village, long since rotted down to its parent clay. The sunlight glinted on his shining armor and silken robe, whereof the back was toward me. I aimed, I drew, I loosed. Swift and far the shaft sped forward. By Osiris it struck him full between the shoulders, and lo, the King of Kings, the monarch of the world, lurched forward, fell onto the rail of his chariot, and rolled to the ground. Next instant there arose a roar of, "The king is dead! The great king is dead! Fly! Fly! Fly!" So they fled, and after them thundered the pursuers, slaying and slaying till they could lift their arms no more. Oh, yes, some escaped, though the men of Thebes and the country folk murdered many of them, and but a few ever won back to the east to tell the tale of the blotting out of the mighty army of the King of Kings and of the doom dealt to him by the great black bow of Shabaka the Egyptian. I stood there gasping, when suddenly I heard a voice at my side. It said, "You seem to have done very well, brother, even better than we did yonder on the other side of the town, though some might think that fray a thing whereof to make a song. Also, that last shot of yours was worthy of a good archer, for I marked it. I marked it. A great lord was laid low thereby. Let us go and see who it was." I threw my arm round the bull neck of Bez, and leaning on him, advanced to where the king lay alone, save for the fallen about him. "This man is not yet sped," said Bez. "Let us look upon his face." And he turned him over, and stretched him there upon the sand with the arrow standing 2 spans beyond his corslet. "Why," said Bez, "this is a certain high one with whom we had dealings in the east." And he laughed thickly. The great king opened his eyes and knew us, and on his dying features came a look of hate. "So you have conquered, Egyptian," he said. "Oh, if only I had you again in the east, whence in my folly I let you go. You would have set me in your boat, would you not, whence by the wisdom of Bez I escaped? More than that, he gasped. I shall not serve you so, I went on. I shall leave you to die as a warrior should upon a fair-fought field. But learn, tyrant and murderer, that the shaft which overthrew you came from a black bow you coveted and thought you had received, and that this hand loosed it, not at hazard. I guessed it, he whispered. Know, too, King, that the Lady Amada, whom you also coveted, waits to be my wife, that your mighty army is destroyed, and that Egypt is free by the hands of Shabaka the Egyptian and Bez the dwarf. Shabaka the Egyptian, he muttered, whom I held and let go because of a dream and for policy. So, Shabaka, you will wed Amada, whom I desired because I could not take her, and doubtless you will rule Egypt, for Pharaoh, I think, is as I am today. Oh, Shabaka, you are strong and a great warrior, but there is something stronger than you in the world, that which men call fate. Such success as yours offends the gods. Look on me, Shabaka. Look on the King of Kings, the ruler of the earth, lying shamed in the dust before you. And accursed Shabaka, do not call yourself happy until you see death as near as I do now. Then he threw his arms wide and died. We called the soldiers to bear his body, and having set the pursuit, with that royal clay entered into Amada in triumph. It was not a very great town, and the temple was its finest building, and thither we wended. In the outer court we found Pharaoh lying at the point of death, for from many wounds his life drained out with his flowing blood, nor could the leeches help him. "Greeting, Shabaka," he said. "You and the Ethiopians have saved Egypt. My son is slain in the battle, and I too am slain. And who remains to rule her save you? You and Amada. Would that you had married her at once and never left my side. But she was foolish and headstrong, and I was jealous of you, Shabaka. Forgive me, and farewell." He spoke no more, although he lived a little while. Quatermain came from the inner court. She greeted her husband, then turned and said, "Lord Shabaka, one waits to welcome you." I rested myself upon her shoulder, for I could not walk alone. "What happened to the army of Karun?" I asked as we went slowly. "That happened, Lord, which the holy Tanofir foretold. The Easterns attacked across the swamp, thinking to bear us down by numbers, but the paths were too narrow and their columns were bogged in the mud. Still they struggled on against the arrows to its edge, and there the Ethiopians fell on them, and being lighter-footed and without armor had the mastery of them, who were encumbered by their very multitude. Oh, I saw it all from the temple-top. Bez did well, and I am proud of him, as I am proud of you." "It is of the Ethiopians that you should be proud, Quatermain, since with 1 to 5 they have won a great battle." We came to the end of the second court, where there was a sanctuary. "Enter," said Quatermain, and fell back. I did so, and though the cedar door was left a little ajar, at first I could see nothing because of the gloom of the place. By degrees my eyes grew accustomed to the darkness, and I perceived an alabaster statue of the goddess Isis of the size of life, who held in her arms an ivory child, also life-size. Then I heard a sigh, and, looking down, saw a woman clad in white kneeling at the feet of the statue, lost in prayer. Suddenly she arose and turned, and the ray of light from the door ajar fell upon her. It was Amada, draped only in the transparent robe of a priestess, and oh, she was beautiful beyond imagining, so beautiful that my heart stood still. She saw me in my battered mail, and the blood flowed up to her breast and brow, and in her eyes there came a light such as I had never known in them before, the light that is lit only by the torch of a woman's love. Yes, no longer were hers the eyes of a priestess. They were the eyes of a woman who burns with mortal passion. "Amada," I whispered. "Amada, found at last."
"Shabaka,"
she whispered back.
"Returned at last to me, your home."
And she stretched out her arms toward me, but before I could take her into mine, she uttered a little cry and shrank away.
"Oh, not here," she said. "Not here in the presence of this Holy One who watches all that passes in heaven and earth."
"Then perchance, Amada, she has watched the freeing of Egypt on yonder field today and knows for whose sake it was done."
"Hearken, Shabaka, I am your guerdon. Moreover, as a woman, I am yours. There is naught I desire so much as to feel your kiss upon me. For it and it alone I am ready to risk my spirit's death and torment. But for you I fear. Twice have I sworn myself to this goddess, and she is very jealous of those who rob her of her votaries. I fear that her curse will not fall only on me, but on you also, and not only for this life, but for all lives that may be given to us. For your own sake, I pray you leave me. I hear that Pharaoh, my uncle, is dead or dying, and doubtless they will offer you the throne. Take it, Shabaka, for in it I ask no share. Take it and leave me to serve the goddess till my death."
"I too serve a goddess," I answered hoarsely, "and she is named Love, and you are her priestess. Little I care for Isis, who serve the goddess Love. Come, kiss me here and now, ere perchance I die. Kiss me who have waited long enough, and so let us be wed." One moment she paused, swaying in the wind of passion, like a tall reed on the banks of Nile, and then she sank upon my breast and pressed her lips against my own. And after, for a few moments, I, Shabaka, seemed to be lost in a kind of delirium and surrounded by a rose-hued mist. Then I, Allan Quatermain, heard a sharp, quick sound as of a clock striking, and I looked up. It was a clock, a beautiful old clock on a mantelpiece opposite to me, and the hands showed that it had just struck the hour of 10. Now I remembered that centuries ago, as I was dropping asleep, I did not know why, I had seen that clock and those hands in the same position, and known that it was striking the second stroke of 10. What did it all mean? Had thousands of years gone by, or only 8 seconds? There was a weight upon my shoulder. I glanced round to see what it was, and discovered that the beautiful head of Lady Ragnall, who was sweetly sleeping there. Lady Ragnall. And in that very strange dream which I had dreamed, she was the priestess called Amada. Look, there was a mark of the new moon above her breast. And not a second ago I had been in a shrine with Amada dressed as Lady Ragnall was tonight, in circumstances so intimate that it made me blush to think of them. Lady Ragnall, Amada, Lady Ragnall, a shrine, a boudoir. Oh, I must be going mad. I could not disturb her. It would have been, well, unseemly. So I, Shabaka, or Allan Quatermain, just sat still, feeling curiously comfortable, and tried to piece things together, when suddenly Lady Ragnall woke.
"I wonder," she said without lifting her head from my shoulder, "what happened to the holy Tanofir? I think that I heard him outside the shrine giving directions for the digging of Pharaoh's grave at that spot, and saying that he must do so at once, as his time was very short. Yes, and I wish that he would go away." "Oh, my goodness!" she exclaimed, and suddenly sprang up. I too rose, and we stood facing each other. Between us, in front of the fire, stood the tripod and the bowl of black stone at the bottom of which lay a pinch of white ashes, the remains of the taduki. We stared at it and at each other. "Oh, where have we been, Mr. Quatermain?" she gasped, looking at me round-eyed. "I don't know," I answered confusedly. "To the east, I suppose. That is, it was all a dream." "A dream?" she said. "What nonsense! Tell me, were you or were you not in a sanctuary just now with me before the statue of Isis, the same that fell on George 2 years ago and killed him? And did you or did you not give me a necklace of wonderful rosy pearls, which we put on the neck of the statue as a peace offering because I had broken my vows to the goddess? Those that you won from the great king?" "No," I answered triumphantly. "I did nothing of the sort. Is it likely I should have taken those priceless pearls into battle? I gave them to Karima to keep after my mother returned them to me on her deathbed. I remember it distinctly." "Yes, and Karima handed them to me again as your love token when she appeared in the city with the holy Tanofir. And what was more welcome at the moment, something to eat, for we were near starving, you know. Well, I threw them over your neck and my own in the shrine to be the symbol of our eternal union. But afterwards we thought that it might be wise to offer them to the goddess, to appease her, you know. Oh, how dared we plight our mortal troth, there in her very shrine and presence, and I her twice sworn servant. It was insult heaped on sacrilege." "At a guess, because love is stronger than fear," I replied. "But it seems that you dreamed a little longer than I did. So perhaps you can tell me what happened afterwards. I only got as far as, well, I forget how far I got," I added, for at that moment full memory returned and I could not go on. She blushed to her eyes and grew disturbed. "It is all mixed up in my mind, too," she exclaimed. "I can only remember something rather absurd and affectionate. You know what strange things dreams are." "I thought you said it wasn't a dream." "Really, I don't know what it was. But your wound doesn't hurt you, does it? You are bleeding a good deal. It stained me here," and she touched her breast and looked down wonderingly at her sacred ancient robe, as though she expected to see it was red. "As there is no stain now, it must have been a dream. But my word, that was a battle," I answered. "Yes, I watched it from the pylon top, and oh, it was glorious. Do you remember the charge of the Ethiopians against the immortals? Why, of course you must, as you led it. And then the fall of Pharaoh Peroa. He was George, you know. And the death of the great king, killed by your black bow. You were a wonderful shot even then, you see. And the burning of the ships, how they blazed. And 100 other things." "Yes," I said. "It came off. The holy Tanofir was a good strategist, or his cup was, I don't know which." "And you were a good general, and so for the matter of that was Bez. What agonies I went through while the fight hung doubtful. My heart was on fire. Yes, I seemed to burn for—" And she stopped. "For whom?" I asked. "For Egypt, of course. And when, reflected in the alabaster, I saw you enter that shrine where you remember I was praying for your success and safety, I nearly died of joy. For you know I had been, well, attached to you, to Shabaka, I mean, all the time. That's my part of the story which I dare say you did not see. Although I seemed so cold and wayward, I could love. Yes, in that life I knew how to love. And Shabaka looked, oh, a hero with his rent mail and the glory of triumph in his eyes. He was very handsome, too, in his way. But what nonsense I am talking." "Yes, great nonsense. Still, I wish we were sure how it ended. It was a pity that you forget. for I am crazed with curiosity. I suppose there is no more Taduki, is there?" "Not a scrap," she answered firmly. "And if there were, it would be fatal to take it twice on the same day. We have learned all there is to learn. Perhaps it is well, though I should like to know what happened after our marriage." "So we were married, were we? I mean," she went on, ignoring my remark, "whether you ruled long in Egypt. For you, or rather Shabaka, did rule, although whether the Easterns returned and drove us out, or what. You see, the ivory child went away somehow, for we found it again in Kenda land only a few years ago." "Perhaps we retired to Ethiopia," I suggested, "and the worship of the child continued in some part of that country after the Ethiopian king passed away." "Perhaps. Only I don't think Karima could ever have gone back to Ethiopia unless she was obliged. You remember how she hated the place. No, not even to see those black children of hers. Well, as we can never tell, it is no use speculating." "I thought there was more Taduki," I remarked sadly. "I am sure I saw some in the coffer." "Not one bit," she answered still more firmly than before, and stretching out her hand, she shut down the lid of the coffer before I could look into it. "It may be best so. For as it stands, the story had a happy ending, and I don't want to learn how the curse of Isis fell on you and me." "So you believe in that?" "Yes, I do," she answered with passion. "And what is more, I believe that it is working still, which perhaps is why we have all come down in the world. You and I and George and Hans, yes, even old Harut, whom we knew in Kenda land, who, I think, was the holy Tanofir. For as surely as I live, I know beyond possibility of doubt that whatever we may be called today, you were the General Shabaka, and I was the priestess Amada, royal lady of Egypt. And between us and about us the curse of Isis wavers like a sword. That is why George was killed, and that is why— But I feel very tired. I think I'd better go to bed." "As I recall, I have explained. I was obliged to leave Ragnall Castle early the next morning to keep a shooting engagement. Oh, heavens, to keep a shooting engagement! But whatever Lady Ragnall said, there was plenty more Taduki, as I have good reason to know." Allan Quatermain. End of chapter 17. End of An Ancient Allan by H. Rider Haggard. Recorded by Keith Salis.